Chapter 19, Culture Clash. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Monday, 26 December 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. With an exasperated sigh, Hermione dropped her copy off Daily Profitento the tabletop. Picking up a forkful of eggs, she contemplated the front page again. Dumbledore's Giant Mistake, by Special Correspondent Rita Skeeter. While Hermione had expected the Yule Ball to be covered in today's paper, it hadn't made the front page, at least not quite. Instead, a special report about Professor Hagrid had that honor. And while the article was blatantly biased, it did raise a couple of valid points after all. The fact that Hagrid was half-giant didn't surprise Hermione. She'd suspected something of the sort given his enormous size and fixation on dangerous creatures. And when it came right down to it, as nice as the man was, he really wasn't the best teacher in the school, not that that was saying much considering some of the other staff appointments over the years. His lessons were either downright scary and dangerous, or, after losing his confidence after the Hippogriff incident, incredibly boring and futile. Still, he was a professor, and in Hermione's mind, that afforded him a lot of leeway. In the last year and a half, ever since she'd begun care of magical creatures, she'd had to berate herself more times than she cared to count when she'd found herself disparaging the man. Mording Hermione. Pulling herself back from her introspection, Hermione blinked to find Neville sitting across from her. A quick scan past the boy showed her the Gryffindor table practically deserted, most likely prompting him to sit at the Ravenclaw table instead. "Good morning, Neville," she replied. "You're up a lot later than normal." Neville grinned at her. "Yeah, well, I got to bed a lot later than usual, so it's not surprising." "I take it you had a good time last night?" she asked. "The best," Neville replied. "I think Hannah and I were one of the last ones to leave. It was amazing. And you? How was your night with Victor?" "Victor was a perfect gentleman and an excellent dancer," Hermione replied. "So, yes, I had a fabulous time as well." "That's good," Neville replied before nodding at the paper beside her. "Anything in that?" "Yes," Hermione said darkly. "At least on the front page. It came a lot later than normal, so I suspect that they held off printing it until they got a report from the ball." At his gesture, Hermione nodded, and Neville swiveled the paper around until he could see the front page. "Oh no," he groaned, and immediately looked up towards the staff table. "I haven't seen Professor Hagrid at all this morning," Hermione told him, "nor Professor Dumbledore." Neville simply nodded before turning back to the article and reading it through. "You know, I really, really hate Malfoy," Neville stated. Hermione didn't think that that deserved a response. Instead, she simply took a drink of pumpkin juice. "Do you mind?" Neville asked, gesturing to the paper. "Be my guest," Hermione replied. Neville had barely turned the page before he let out a low, venomous "Merlin." "Neville," Hermione admonished. Instead of apologizing, Neville simply turned the paper until they could both see it at the same time. The top half of page 3 of the Prophet was taken up with a recount of the Yule Ball, or more precisely, about Harry's appearance at the Yule Ball. Fully one half of the article was a wizarding photo of Harry and Daphne dancing during the Champion's dance. It was even in full color. Harry and Daphne, him in his tuxedo and she in her exquisite midnight blue dress, waltzed from one side of the photo to the other. The remaining champions and their dates, including Hermione, could be seen dancing in the background. The Boy Who Lived to Mock Wizarding Society, by Rita Skeeter. This year has seen the revival of an ancient wizarding competition that pits the three largest and most prestigious schools in Europe against each other in a friendly event that will help our younger generation to build better ties with those throughout the wider wizarding world. A traditional part of the TriWizard tournament has always been the Yule Ball. This event gives our young people a chance to dress up in their finest wizarding attire and dance the night away in a fun way that celebrates our way of life. This event was supposed to be even more special, as it also included a celebration of the return of the boy who lived to the wizarding world. But what should have been a celebration turned into a mockery of all that we hold dear. And who is to blame for that? Why, none other than Harry Potter himself. While all of his fellow champions as well as his peers dressed in their finest, the latest style dress robes for the young men and the most beautiful of dresses for the young ladies, Harry Potter chose to wear something Muggle. Apparently the outfit that the boy who lived chose is considered formal wear in the Muggle world, but here in the real world, it was nothing less than atrocious. The only ones who considered the attire stylish were themselves ignorant of our very way of life and traditions, the Muggle-born and raised. It is a well-known fact that not only his date, Miss Daphne Greengrass, heiress of Lord Cyrus Greengrass, but also Deputy Headmistress McGonagall asked Mr. Potter to change into something more appropriate. Harry Potter simply refused, if you can believe that, my dear readers. If it wasn't for this blatant disregard of all the traditions that we hold so very dear, then the Yule Ball would have been declared a resounding success. Students from the three schools mixed and mingled together, laughing and clearly enjoying themselves throughout the night. One can only be thankful that Harry Potter seemed to have eventually gotten the message. He was seen leaving the ball when the night was only half over. We can only hope that this faux pas won't be repeated, and that the boy who lived has learnt his lesson. "Have you seen Harry yet this morning?" Neville asked when he finished reading. "No, I haven't," Hermione replied grimly, shaking her head. "I didn't know that he left early," Neville commented. "Neither did I," Hermione replied. "I vaguely recall seeing Daphne sitting with Tracy towards the end of the evening, but I just assumed that Harry was off getting them drinks or something." "I think I might head up and warn Harry about this," Neville said, slapping the paper. "I'll see you later, Hermione." "Bye, Neville," Hermione replied. Absently, she watched him leave, wondering what Harry's response was likely to be to it. Pushing the thought aside, she turned back to her paper. /0v0 / Tuesday, 27 December 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Daphne picked at her breakfast, not really interested in eating, but at the same time knowing that she should. Beside her, Tracy had given up on getting her to talk. She'd tried all the previous day, but had eventually found that Daphne simply wasn't in the mood. Of course, not talking meant thinking, and that was something that she didn't want to do either. And it was all Potter's fault, Harry's fault. If he had just done what he was supposed to do and fit into the culture and traditions that he was born into, then Daphne wouldn't be having to think much. Ordinarily, she loved thinking, working out new puzzles, understanding the world around her. What she didn't like, however, was having her basic beliefs challenged like that, and in such an unexpected way. She was a product of a pureblood wizarding culture that stretched back hundreds of generations, a culture that Harry himself should have been a part of. Instead, the boy seemed determined to flaunt his Muggle upbringing in the face of the culture that he'd entered. And that was precisely the problem that the purebloods had with Muggle-borns. They were the ones coming into the wizarding world. It was their responsibility to fit into it, to learn all of the traditions and what made this world so special. Most Muggle-borns eventually learnt that, or they simply left, whether back to the Muggle world or to another country, it was all the same. Harry, though, was different. He'd come to Hogwarts much later than anyone else, and because of that, he seemed to have a much greater identity with the culture that he had left. He was also a puzzle, an enigma, not to mention a powerful individual, both in money and potential political power, all things that had drawn Daphne to him, not to mention easy on the eyes. Getting to know Harry was the Slytherin thing to do. There were a great many in her house alone, both male and female, envious of her access to the boy who lived, and everything had been going along so well. Until that conversation in the rose garden. She had tried to explain wizarding culture to the boy. She had attempted to help him understand the proper form of dress and what purebloods thought of other, lesser parts of their society. And then he'd ask it that. And what about you, Daphne? Do you believe all of that? You're taking care with Hagrid and Charms with Flitwick. You're friends with both Hermione and me. Is that what you truly think about us? It was still bouncing around in her head, keeping her from sleeping at night. Did she really believe everything that she'd been taught with the evidence of the people she'd met, the teachers that she'd had, and the friends that she'd made? That was the question, and one that she was still struggling to answer. It didn't help that the one person that she felt that she needed to talk to about all of this, to help her see a different side, so that she could finally weigh up the pros and cons of each, hadn't been seen since he'd left her standing in the middle of the rose garden. Her rambling introspection was interrupted by the unexpected flap of dark wings and a large eagle owl landing gracefully right in front of her. A leg was extended, showing the parchment tied there, obviously for her. "Hello, Mercury," she said. "What do you have there?" A single glance at the sharp lines of her name, written on the outside of the parchment, told Daphne exactly who had sent the note, even if the sight of Mercury, the Greengrass family owl, hadn't. There was only one reason why her father would be writing to her. The fact that Mercury took flight immediately after stealing a piece of bacon told her that an answer wasn't expected. Another clue as to what the note held. Sighing, she determined to get it over with and slit the seal, unrolling the parchment. While I applaud your intentions to make connections with and learn about Harry Potter, after seeing the article in Thedley Prophet, I find myself questioning the extent to which you are willing to go in your efforts. By all means, learn everything that you can about Potter, disregarding his ignorance of our world, the Potter name and wealth, not to mention the seat on the Wisengamot that he will eventually hold. Information about him will be worth its weight in gold. Tutor him if you must, befriend him if you will, but I forbid you from anything more than this. The honor of the Greengrass name will one day rest with you. Do not do anything that will damage it now. It was exactly as she expected, and to be truthful, similar to her own conclusions. Harry, with all of his Muggle ideas and his disregard for the wizarding traditions and way of life, wasn't worth the effort of anything more than casual acquaintance. Now, if only she could convince herself to believe that. /0v0 / Tuesday, 27 December 1994. The Library, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I told you we should have checked the library first, Hermione couldn't help but say. Susan simply ignored her, a slight frown the only indication that she'd heard. Rounding the table on opposite sides, the two girls slid into seats directly opposite the black-haired Slytherin engrossed in one of the many books surrounding her workspace. And then they waited. Finally, Daphne sighed, an indication that she'd given in. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up and pinning each of the other two girls with her piercing blue eyes. "Have you seen Harry today?" Hermione asked. "No," Daphne replied shortly. "What about yesterday?" Susan asked. Again, Daphne went for the simple answer. "No." The two girls shared a look then, before they faced Daphne once more. "So when was the last time that you saw him?" Hermione asked. "At the ball," Daphne replied. "When at the ball? I didn't see the two of you leave together," Susan stated. "What is it with the 20 questions?" Daphne huffed. "No, I haven't seen Harry. No, I don't know where he is. What more do you want from me?" "Well, you see, no one's seen Harry since the ball," Susan said. "That's not quite true," Hermione interjected. "Neville saw him yesterday morning in his quarters, but no one since then. And as you seem to be the last one who saw him, we were wondering why he seems to be hiding," Susan finished. Daphne looked between the two. "I'm not psychic," nor a mind reader, so I have no idea what Harry's doing in his room without others around. I am also not his keeper, and therefore am not expected to know. You may not be his keeper, but you were his date, Hermione pointed out. And the fact that he left the ball early and has since been holed up in his room and refusing to answer his door leads us to wonder if something happened between the two of you at the ball, Susan said. The fact that Daphne was fidgeting with the book that she'd been reading, opening and closing it, flipping through the page edges, constantly moving it minutely around the desk, told the other two girls that she knew exactly what was going on. As such, Susan and Hermione simply sat where they were, staring at Daphne until she caved. It might have taken close to 5 minutes, but there were two of them, and only one of her and they were able to provide the pressure that was obviously needed. All right, we had a fight. Happy now, Daphne finally blurted. Susan and Hermione simply nodded, already having deduced as much. What did you fight about? Hermione asked gently. Once again, it took a little while before Daphne was willing to tell. We overheard Hagrid and Madame Maxine talking, and Hagrid saying that he was half-giant, Daphne finally said. I freaked out a bit. You know the stories, I'm sure. Susan simply nodded. Well, then I tried to explain to Harry how half-humans and Muggle-borns are viewed in wizarding society, Daphne continued. Let's just say that he didn't agree. How are half-humans and Muggle-borns viewed? Hermione asked, her eyes narrowed. Not well, Susan said simply. Most purebloods look down on them because they don't fit into wizarding culture, instead trying to bring in their own, thus potentially changing the way things have always been done. But change can be a good thing, Hermione protested. I know that, Susan replied. But you've got to remember that witches and wizards live a long time. Our average lifespan is around 130, compared to about 70 for muggles. And for people who have lived that long and seen so much, they aren't that interested in having everything that they've always known changing. It doesn't help that they're also the people in politically powerful positions within the wizarding world. Traditions are everything to them. Hermione nodded her head slowly. I can understand that, I think, but still, a society that is stagnant is inevitably doomed to fall. Not all purebloods think like that, Susan said. My aunt, for example, the Weasleys for another. But there are far more ancient houses that don't feel that way, Daphne cut in. And you'll find members of a large proportion of them in the Slytherin dungeons. So you argued with Harry about it and he left, Hermione said, bringing them back on track. I might have said that I agreed with it, Daphne said meekly. Hermione groaned. And as someone fresh from the Muggle world, it would have been enough to scare him off, she said. I've been in this world for 3.5 years and I've read a lot about the wizarding culture and still have problems accepting it. I understand it, which helps, but Harry's had none of that. He may have been born in this culture, but he's lived in the Muggle one for so long that that's the way that he would be thinking. At least we now know why he's in hiding, Susan said. He's trying to understand this new world and is probably finding everything overwhelming. So what are you going to do about Harry? Hermione asked Daphne. Are you going to try and talk to him, get him to understand your position, and maybe even attempt to understand his? Daphne lowered her head. These were some of the questions that she'd been asking herself, questions that Shestel had no answers to. I don't know, she finally admitted. /0v0 / Wednesday, 28 December 1994. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Is it really necessary to do this now, Dumbledore? A limp Maxine asked as she lowered herself into the oversized chair in front of Dumbledore's desk. It is always best to get these sort of details in place in case of unexpected occurrences closer to the big event, Albus replied, his eyes twinkling away behind his half-moon spectacles. Well, if we're going to do it, then let's get it done. I've a good bottle of vodka waiting for me back in my cabin, Igor Karkaroff stated. In that case, shall we begin with your champion, Igor? Albus asked. Would Miss Granger suit as Victor's hostage? From what I have heard from my students, I believe so, Igor replied. Victor seems to have really taken a shine to the girl. Apparently he watched her in the library for weeks before asking her to the ball. Miss Granger it is then, Albus said, making a note on the parchment in front of him. And what of Miss Delacour, a limp? Can we use her Yule ball date? Albus asked. Zat buffoon? No, certainly not, she replied. I believe Zat Fleur only asked Z boy because she thought him attractive. Nan, there is nothing there. Do you have an alternative suggestion? Albus asked. Fleur's sister, Gabrielle, would work. I am sure that I can get her parents to agree to send her to Hogwarts for Z's second task, Olymp replied. Very good, Albus said, once again making a short note on his parchment. When he looked up, it was to see his two counterparts, as well as Minerva tucked away in the corner, looking at him expectantly. I believe that Miss Chang will do nicely for Mr. Diggory, he stated. It is my understanding that they have been an item for some time now. Before adding Miss Chang's name to his list, Albus looked across to his deputy to receive her nod of agreement. That just leaves Mr. Potter, Albus said. I believe that Miss Greengrass would be the most appropriate. Are you sure about that, Albus? Minerva asked. Certainly, Albus replied. Miss Greengrass tutors Mr. Potter in 2 subjects, and I have often seen the 2 together at other times. And you all saw how the 2 of them interacted at the Yule Ball, particularly on the dance floor. Yes, I believe that Mr. Potter is developing a strong attachment to Miss Greengrass. I'm not convinced, Albus, Minerva countered. The rumors that I've been hearing the last couple of days indicates that the 2 have had a falling out. Who else is there? Igor asked. The only other one that I've seen the boy conversing with at length is that dragon. No. Even if Mr. Potter and Miss Greengrass are having a difference of opinion at the moment, I'm sure that it will blow over quickly. And in any case, Mr. Potter will in no way countenance leaving one of friends at the bottom of the Black Lake, Albus declared. Then Miss Greengrass it is, Minerva sighed. Excellent, Albus declared, adding the 4th name to the parchment. We now have all 4 hostages decided upon. In the morning, I shall confirm with Merchieftainess Mercus that the arrangements within the Black Lake will be ready. Chapter 20. Serious Tidings. Disclaimer, I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Thursday, 29, December 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Knock, knock. Knock, nick, knock, knock. Harry stumbled from his bedroom, letting his feet guide the way. His glasses dangled from one fist, a fist that, like its partner, was currently in the process of wiping the sleep from his eyes. A sound of scuffling came from beyond his door, and he wondered what in the world was going on. The 2 different-sounding knocks was bad enough. The first had obviously been Sir Roderick announcing that he had a visitor. He'd heard it often enough to be able to distinguish the knight's knock quite easily. The other was obviously someone too impatient to wait for Harry to get up and answer his door. Knock, nick, knock. Whoever it was in a desperate hurry to see him. Slipping his glasses into place and running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to tame it into something that didn't resemble bed hair was enough for Harry to feel ready to find out who this rude person was who decided to wake him up so early on a Saturday. Harry flung open the door and promptly blinked before bursting into laughter. Sirius was in a desperate and losing battle against the statue of Sir Roderick. He had one arm pinned between the knight's body and arm, his other arm around the knight's head, and somehow had managed to get one foot caught over the top of Sir Roderick's shield. The knight had also stuck his wand up Sirius' shirt, pinning him in place while nearly lifting him off of the ground. Was that you banging on my door? Harry asked when he finally stopped laughing. Sirius' pout instantly restarted Harry's laughter. Well, don't just stand there laughing. Tell this monstrosity to let me go, an exasperated Sirius instructed. I don't know, Sirius. You did wake me up with your banging on my door, Harry replied. Harry, Sirius shouted. All right, he grinned. Let him go, Sir Roderick. The knight turned his stone head towards Harry and nodded. Immediately he shifted his arm, allowing the pinned arm to fall away. The wand was removed from Sirius' shirt, while Sir Roderick simultaneously lowering his shield so that Sirius' foot dropped back towards the ground. Only the fact that Sirius still had a hold around the knight's neck prevented the wizard from ending up in a heap on the ground. Well, aren't you going to invite me in? Sirius asked. Harry shrugged. Would you like to come in, Sirius? As Sirius passed him, trying to look dignified despite Harry's continued chuckles at his expense, Harry turned to the guardian of his room and bowed slightly. Thank you, he said. Sir Roderick straightened slightly before simply turning until he was back in place, facing outwards to resume his duties. So, what brings you to my humble abode at this god-awful hour of the morning? Harry asked, after shutting the door. Sirius looked seriously back at him, his eyes raking every inch of the sleep-tousled boy. I'd heard that you'd holed yourself up in here and weren't coming out or answering your door, Sirius replied. I was worried. Harry ran a hand through his hair, making it even messier than it already was. Yeah, guess I have been a bit of a hermit, Harry allowed. I understand that there was some kind of fight at the Yule Ball, Sirius asked delicately. Harry fell into one of the armchairs. I wouldn't say fight, he said, shaking his head. More of a difference of opinion. Do you want to tell me about it? Sirius asked. Harry shook his head. Not really. It was mostly getting to see and understand the wizarding culture like I never had before. A culture clash, I guess. You sure that you don't want to talk about it? Sirius tried again. Yeah, I've been thinking about it constantly for the last couple of days, and I think I've thought about it as much as I want to at the moment. Sirius looked around the room, his eyes seeming to linger on the table near the window. You have been eating, right? He asked. What? Oh, yeah, sure, Harry replied. The house elves have been bringing me my meals and taking away the dishes afterwards. Good, Sirius nodded. So, you've just been holed up in here thinking. Harry stared at his godfather. Now that sounds like a recipe for driving yourself insane. No, I haven't simply been sitting here thinking. I've been working. Working? Sirius asked, perking up at the change of topic. Yeah, come on, I'll show you, Harry said, pushing himself to his feet. Harry led the way into his room, and then down into his workshop, before making a flourishing gesture towards his newest creation. It was a small platform made out of polished oak, easily 2 meters wide and 5 meters long. Even though it wasn't very high off of the ground, only 2 feet, a set of 3 small steps had been built at one end of it. What is it? Sirius asked, as he walked around the platform. I thought that would be obvious. It's a platform, Harry replied. Yeah, I got that much, Sirius said. I guess I should have asked what it's for. It's for Professor Flitwick, Harry replied. Sirius looked back at the platform before barking out a laugh. I take it Phileas is still using stacks of books to stand on when he gives his lessons, Sirius asked. Yeah, Harry replied before a dark look flitted across his face. So I figured that I'd make him this. Us half-castes have to stick together after all. Sirius opened his mouth to say something to that, but promptly closed it again, obviously thinking better of whatever he was going to say. Is it finished? He asked instead. Yeah, finished it last night, Harry replied. Now I'm just trying to teach myself the shrinking charm so that I can get it out of here. The unexpected hissing sound spun Sirius around, one hand reaching for his wand. When he identified the source, though, he relaxed slightly. I don't think that I'll ever get used to that, Sirius stated, gesturing to the painting sitting in the corner of the room on its easel. What'd she say, anyway? Ramaranth was pointing out that I'm doing a poor job of learning the charm, Harry replied, scowling at the painting of the dragon. Well, at least you've had company down here, Sirius commented, although it came out more as a question. With a shake of his head, he switched topics. I'm not surprised that you're having trouble. Reducio's a fifth-year charm. Let's see your wand movement. With a flick of his wrist, Harry's wand was in his hand, and he was demonstrating the charm. Close, but you've got to make the movements a bit sharper, Sirius said. Here, watch me. /0v0 / Thursday, 29, December 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry and Sirius had remained holed up in Harry's quarters for the remainder of the day. Together they'd worked on not only the shrinking charm, but also the engorgement charm until Harry could not only complete both with ease, but also had started to have some success at affecting small objects with both charms wandlessly. In between the spell work, Harry'd eventually told Sirius about his conversation with Daphne. It had been a halting conversation, especially when Harry had had to explain things from the non-magical perspective for the older man. Apparently his mother, Lily, had already had similar conversations with not only Sirius, but also with his dad and their friends, making it slightly easier to explain where Harry was coming from. Sirius, for his part, mostly listened, throwing in a question here or there, not only to clarify something, but also to get Harry thinking about the pureblood perspective. It didn't mean that Harry liked it or agreed with it in the slightest, but by the end of the conversation, he could at least see where the opposing point of view came from. Now, while we're here, all alone with no one around, Sirius said, tell me what you've got planned for the second task. When Harry started to shake his head, Sirius seemed to misinterpret his meaning and quickly protested. I know that the champions aren't supposed to have any help, but you can bet your last nut that the French and Bulgarian headmasters are doing everything that they can to make sure that their champion wins. And you can also bet that the Diggory Boy'll be getting every scrap of help that he can as well. That wasn't what I was going to say, Harry said, finally managing to interrupt Sirius' protests. It wasn't, Sirius asked. What were you going to say then? I was going to say that I haven't given the second task the slightest bit of thought whatsoever, Harry replied. Sirius' mouth moved up and down for a minute before he jumped to his feet. Now that's simply not going to be good enough. Where's your clue, egg, whatever? The man looked around the room, as though he expected the large golden egg to be out on display somewhere. I put it away in the back of one of the cupboards in my workshop, Harry told him. What you do that for? Sirius asked. It isn't going to solve itself hidden away in there. Harry gave him a nonplussed look. Wait until you hear it, and then tell me that you would have done anything different. Sirius simply waved his comment aside, instead insisting that Harry go and retrieve the egg. When he returned, he balanced it on the coffee table, placed his hand on the latch, and looked across at his godfather. Don't say I didn't warn you, he said, and turned the latch. The instant that the sides fell away, a horrible screeching rent the air, causing both wizards to clap their hands over their ears. Seeing the pained expression on his godfather's face, Harry scrambled to get the sides of the egg back into place before resetting the latch. What in Merlin's saggy trousers was that? Sirius asked in a loud voice. Harry shook his head, both in answer to the question and in an attempt to clear the ringing in his ears. That was why I put the thing in the back of the cupboard, he deadpanned. That was one hell of a noise, Sirius said, shaking his head. And that's your clue for the second task. That's it, Harry confirmed. They don't make it half hard, do they? Sirius asked. He walked around then, alternately staring at the egg and the ceiling while rubbing the back of his neck. There's nothing else, no other clue, he asked. Nope, that's it, Harry replied. What about the other champions? None of them have dropped any hints at all. Not to me, Harry replied. Have they done anything out of the ordinary, gone anywhere, been in any particular part of the library more than usual? Sirius persisted. Harry shook his head before pausing mid-shake, something that Sirius pounced on. You've thought of something. What is it? Even the smallest thing might give us a clue, he insisted. Well, Harry replied slowly, never let it say that Victor's been swimming in the lake a lot the last couple of weeks, and Fleur and Cedric have been staring at the lake a lot as well. The lake, huh? Sirius mused. I wonder. With that, he snatched up the egg and raced off towards the bathroom, Harry trailing along behind. Sirius, what are you doing? Harry called. Following a hunch, the old marauder called back. By the time that Harry had reached the bathroom, Sirius already had the basin half filled with water, the egg sitting in the bottom of it. The instant that the water had covered the egg, Sirius reached in and opened the latch. The sound that gurgled out of the water was pleasanter. At least, there wasn't any hint of the horrendous screeching that had been going on. But whatever the muffled sound was, it was indecipherable to the two wizards above the water. To counter this, Sirius promptly stuck his head into the water. A massive grin was plastered on his face when he pulled his face back out, much like the hair that was stuck to his forehead. It's Mermish, Sirius explained. What? Harry asked. It's Mermish. That's why we were only hearing that screeching sound. You can only understand Mermish underwater, Sirius explained. Harry stared between Sirius and the egg. Then, at Sirius' gesture, he stuck his own head into the water. He started when he heard the melodic voices, so very unlike what the egg was producing above the water. And then he realized that the voices were singing a song. It took a further 4 dunkings before he had the entire song memorized. Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground. And while you're searching, ponder this. Taken what you'll sorely miss. An hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took. But past an hour, the prospect's black. Too late, it's gone, it won't come back. It's a song, the clue's in the song, Harry exclaimed to Sirius. As Harry rushed off to find some paper and a pen to write it down, he noticed his godfather dunking his head in the basin once more. When Harry returned, the poem now firmly clasped in his hand, it was to find a pensive-looking Sirius. What are you thinking? Harry asked. I'm thinking that this task involves the merpeople in the Black Lake, Sirius replied. There are merpeople in the Black Lake, Harry echoed. Sure, Sirius replied, waving the question away. Have been for centuries. It sounds to me as though you're going to have an hour to find something hidden in the lake, most likely in the merpeople village. Harry looked down and reread the poem. The lines definitely supported Sirius' theory. We've taken what you'll sorely miss, Harry read. Does that mean that they're going to steal something from here and use it in the task? Could do, but I doubt it, Sirius replied. No, they'll want something a bit flashier than having the champions look for their favorite broomstick or book or something. No, they'll use something that'll make the crowd a bit more attentive. Like what? Harry asked. My guess would be a hostage, Sirius replied. Put a person down there for the champions to rescue, and the crowds will eat it up. Harry stared at his godfather. They'd put a person at the bottom of a lake, he asked incredulously. Wouldn't that simply kill them? Nah, there are spells and potions that'll simply put someone to sleep in a kind of suspended animation, Sirius replied. Well, who in the world would they use for me? It's not like I've had much of a chance to get that close to people here, and you can forget about the people back home being something that I'd sorely miss, Harry stated. Then, after a second's thought, they wouldn't use you, would they? I wouldn't think so, Sirius replied slowly. Most likely it'll be one of your friends. Harry's mind immediately dashed to his 4 tutors, Neville, Hermione, Susan, and Daphne. And then he knew. It was obviously really. Daphne, he breathed. They'll use Daphne, won't they? Sirius nodded. That makes sense, especially after you're taking her to the ball. But we fought, Harry protested. Somehow I don't think that'll matter to the organizers, Sirius replied. So they're going to take Daphne, do something to her, stick her at the bottom of the lake, and then expect me to rescue her within an hour's time limit, Harry summarized slowly. Yep, looks like you'll have your work cut out for you, doesn't it? Sirius grinned. Harry shrugged. I guess, although I never agreed to do more than make a token effort in this blasted tournament. Well, at least think about what you're going to do. You've got nearly 2 months to come up with a plan, Sirius reminded him. All Harry could do was nod. /0v0 / Friday, 30 December 1994. Charms Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Professor Flitwick, Harry asked from the door. The charms master looked up from his desk, a smile on his face as he recognized the head in his doorway. Mr. Potter, come in, he invited. Harry did so, closing the door behind him and making his way through the desks and chairs to reach the area in front of the professor's desk. What can I do for you? Professor Flitwick asked. Suddenly, Harry was feeling nervous. His hand dove into his pocket and he fidgeted with the object that he'd placed there. I've got something for you, he finally said. Indeed, Professor Flitwick replied, sitting back in his chair and folding his hands across his stomach. In reply, Harry simply nodded before taking in the space of the floor. Would you mind if I moved a couple of things? Harry asked. At the professor's gesture, Harry flicked out his wand and levitated half a dozen piles of books from the middle of the room to against the far wall. After mentally measuring the area again, he shifted the front row of desks back half a meter. Finally, he nodded, satisfied. Then, taking out the object in his pocket, he placed it in the middle of the open space, being careful to orientate it exactly right. Engorgio, Harry said, carefully swishing his wand in the sequence that Sirius had taught him. Instantly, the small wooden platform grew from its dollhouse size to the full size that Harry had originally created it to be. Professor Flitwick leant forward in astonishment, his face quickly morphing into a delighted grin. Is that what I think it is, Mr. Potter? He asked. If you think that it's a platform to help make it easier for you to teach and for your students to be able to see you easier, then, yes, it is, Harry replied. In a flash, Professor Flitwick was down and around his desk and bounding up the stairs at the side. Harry smiled, pleased that he'd guessed the correct distance for the stairs to be apart to make it comfortable for the half-goblin. Flitwick bounced from one end of the platform to the other, from the front to the back and back again. Finally, he turned to Harry. Did you make this yourself? He asked. Yes, Harry replied with a nod. It's marvelous, absolutely wonderful, Professor Flitwick beamed. If you were a Hogwarts student, I'd be awarding you a plethora of points, not only for your creativity, but also for your thoughtfulness. Thank you, Professor, Harry said, feeling his cheeks burning. Oh, this is going to be fantastic, Professor Flitwick said, continuing to move about his new platform. Why ever did I not think of something like this before? I can't wait to try it out when classes resume. Thank you so very much, Mr. Potter. You're welcome, Professor, Harry replied. And may I commend you on your engorgement charm as well. Did you do the shrinking charm yourself as well? The professor asked. Yes, I had Sirius teaching me yesterday, Harry replied. Well, a fifth-year spell. It seems that we'll have to accelerate your learning and the types of charms that I should be teaching you, Professor Flitwick said. Harry smiled uncertainly, not sure exactly what he just let himself in for. Chapter 21. They're going to want a show. Disclaimer, I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 31 December 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Movement in his peripheral vision, combined with Neville stiffening beside him at the Gryffindor table, told Harry that something was about to happen. Ominously, he turned his head and immediately felt his stomach begin to churn, as though an entire kaleidoscope of butterflies had just taken up residence there. "Hi, Harry," Daphne said, and immediately went back to chewing her lower lip, an indicator of the nerves that she was also feeling. "Hi, Daphne," he managed to croak. He'd been anticipating and dreading this meeting for nearly the past week, ever since the Yule Ball, which coincidentally also happened to be the last time that they'd seen each other. Not that that was a surprise. Finding out that the person that you were coming to trust the most in this strange new world, the one that you liked the most, held such diametrically opposed viewpoints to you was something of a shock, to put it mildly. And so Harry had hid. He had no illusions that that was exactly what he was doing. He may have tried to fool himself into thinking that he was busy building that platform for Professor Flitwick, but he was hiding, plain and simple. Not that his brain ever really shut off. He'd spent days and sleepless nights going over everything that Daphne had said, as well as what Madame Maxine hadn't said, trying to understand. And when he added in his very first morning in the Great Hall and meeting Draco Malfoy and hearing his beliefs, what he came up with was something ugly, something right out of the Victorian age. Everything had been tossed around in his brain until he had come to one startling decision. Daphne, just like he was a product of their culture, upbringing, and environment. Their beliefs were simply a part of who they were, and while he might not agree, if he twisted his mind the right way, he could sort of understand where she was coming from. "Can we talk?" Daphne asked. Harry's eyes darted around the hall. It was still early on a Saturday morning, which meant that there weren't as many people there as there could be. But the eyes of every one of them was currently fixated on Harry and Daphne. Harry knew the rumors that were bounding around the castle. Neville had reluctantly given in to his urging to be told. These people were all waiting for the show to start. "How about we go outside?" Harry suggested. At her nod, Harry rose, and together they walked from the hall. Not a word was spoken between them until they reached the shore of the lake, their tracks in the snow the only ones around, assuring Harry that they were quite alone. "I'm sorry," Harry blurted. Daphne looked at him, but before she could say anything, he continued. "I'm sorry for walking out on you at the ball. It was incredibly rude of me. You were my date, and I treated you horribly." "I probably shouldn't have said what I said, either," Daphne said softly. "I've been giving it a lot of thought," Harry began. "So have I," Daphne said softly. Harry inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her statement. "I think that what we have here is a significant culture clash," he said. "There's a lot about the wizarding world that I find incredibly hard to understand, let alone accept, with the culture that I grew up in, and I dare say that it's similar for you. That there's a lot about the non-magical culture that you don't understand either." Daphne nodded. "Those clothes that you wore, for one." Harry nodded. "Well, there was no way I was going to wear a dress." "Dress robes," she corrected. "Thus my point," Harry said. "Culture clash. What you see as the height of men's fashion, I see only something that a woman would wear. And the hierarchical structure of wizarding society is something that the non-magical world left behind centuries ago, thus why I have such a problem with it." "But it's how things are," Daphne sighed. I know, I get that," he replied quickly. "And whether it's good or bad is completely arbitrary, dependent on the culture you were brought up in." Daphne nodded slightly and turned away, one shoe scuffling the snow beneath her feet. "So where does that leave us?" she eventually asked. Harry sighed. "I don't know, Daph. I don't know if I can change to the wizarding way of thinking. And as much as I want you to change to my way of thinking, I can task you to give up what you've grown up with." Silence fell between them then. "We can't go back to how things were, can we?" Daphne asked, hope tinged with sadness in her voice. Harry's throat closed up, leaving him to simply shake his head. When he finally found his voice, he said the only thing that he could think of. I hope that we can still be friends. I'd like that, she said softly. /0v0 / Saturday, 7 January 1995. Hagrid's Hut, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It had taken Harry much longer to make this trip than he'd intended. Really, he should have been down here Christmas Day, or, at the very latest, within a day or two after that. Aunt Petunia may not have taught Harry much, but one thing that she made sure to drum into his head was his manners. And it was simply good manners to thank a person properly after they give you a gift, something that a passing remark in a crowded hall was not. And so, Harry was here, raising his hand to knock on the door on the gamekeeper's cabin. A smile lit Harry's face as the instant that he knocked, a deep booming bark sounded. Fang, as good as a doorbell. The instant that the door opened wide enough, the old boarhound was nudging his owner aside to see who their visitor was. It was then all that Harry could do to keep his face free of dog slobber. "Awry, come in, Hagrid insisted, throwing the door open wider. When Harry's attempt to do just that was hampered by Fang, Hagrid reached out one dustbin-sized hand, grabbed Fang's collar, and all but threw the boarhound back inside the hut. "Thanks, Hagrid," Harry said. Inside, the hut was toasty warm, and Harry was quick to shrug off his jacket, gloves, scarf, and beanie. A huge fire was crackling merrily in the fireplace, filling the one-roomed hut not only with its warmth, but also a flickering light and a smattering of smoke that hung lazily around the rafters. "What brings you down here on a day like this?" Hagrid asked. "Know that it's not nice to see you, Harry, 'cause it is." "A couple of things, actually, Hagrid," Harry replied, taking the proffered seat that Hagrid indicated for him. "But mostly, it's because I wanted to thank you for the panpipes you gave me for Christmas." "Do you like 'em?" Hagrid asked, hope clear in his voice. "They're brilliant," Harry replied, pulling said pipes out of his back pants pocket. "It's pear wood, isn't it?" Hagrid beamed through his great bushy beard. "Knew you'd know what it was. Yep, thar's pear wood all right, made 'em myself." "It's beautiful craftsmanship," Harry replied. "I've tried to play them a few times, but I don't think I've found the right technique yet." "Pass 'em air and I'll show you," Hagrid said, sticking out his hand. Harry passed them over, watching intently as Hagrid gave them a quick look over before buffing them on his vest. He then raised them to his mouth so that he could blow over the top of the pipes. A haunting sound began as Hagrid began playing them, and while it wasn't quite the type of music that Harry liked, he couldn't help but smile as he listened. "There you go," Hagrid said when he finished. "You gotta remember to blow soft like. They darn like it, you just try to force all your breath down ever, single pipe." "Thanks, Hagrid, I'll remember that," Harry said, taking them back. The sound of a whistle sounded behind Hagrid, and the big man quickly bustled across to the fire to rescue the kettle. Tea was quickly poured, and a small mountain of rock cakes was placed on the table between them. Harry eyed the cakes warily. He'd made the mistake of trying one the last time that he was here, and was certain that he'd chipped a tooth. "I heard that you got a bit of grief from that newspaper article," Harry said, as delicately as possible. Instantly, Hagrid's face darkened. "Thar's one way of putting it." "I just wanted to say that you shouldn't listen to them, Hagrid. I think that you're brilliant. You were my first friend in the magical world, remember. I don't care what your mum or your dad were like. Look at who my relatives are. It's who we are on the inside that counts," he rambled. It wasn't quite what he'd rehearsed, but judging by the look on Hagrid's face, he thought that it'd do. "Thank you, Harry. Thar means a lot," Hagrid snuffled. "You're a lot like your mum. Did you know Thar?" She'd said exactly the same thing. Harry smiled a small smile. He still didn't know much about his parents, so it was always nice hearing a bit about them. And then to hear that he was like his mum in a way was extra special. Their talk meandered. Then for a while before Harry turned the conversation towards the other reason that he'd sought the gamekeeper out. "You've been here at Hogwarts a long time," Haven't you, Hagrid? Harry asked. More'n 50 years, Hagrid confirmed. So you must know pretty much all there is to know about the place, said Harry. Well, I wouldn't go that far, Hagrid replied. But I'll admit that I know Hogwarts better than most. I was wondering what you could tell me about the lake, Harry asked. The lake, eh? Hagrid asked, a knowing smile on his face. Now I wonder why you want to know about Thar. Don't worry, I'll tell you all I know. Let's see now. There's a lot o' creatures and plants in there. Grindylows for one. Thar all rig, unless you get a whole pack of 'em, then they're annoying little buggers. And there's a whole host of different fish, o' course. Then there's the giant squid. And the merpeople, but I reckon you know about them, eh? Yeah, I know about them, Harry replied grimly. Hagrid scratched his head as he thought. Darn really know what else to tell you, Harry, he said. Darn really have much to do with it, excepting for the furs day of school when I bring the furs years across it in the boats. Boats? Harry asked. He didn't remember seeing any boats on the shore anywhere. Yeah, got a whole fleet of 'em, Hagrid replied. We keep 'em in a small cave under the school, in past the vines in the cliff. Harry nodded absently. Really, apart from finding out that the school had a bunch of boats, he didn't really learn anything new, but he would have kicked himself if he hadn't tasked Hagrid and later found out that he knew something incredibly useful or important. Thanks, Hagrid, that's a great help, he said. /0v0 / Saturday, 4 February 1995. The shore of the Black Lake, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry stared out at the lake before him. This was to be the site of the second task of the TriWizard tournament. Somewhere out there, deep in its very depths, was a village of merpeople, a concept that Hestel had trouble wrapping his mind around. And in the middle of that merpeople village, assuming that he and Sirius had worked out that poem correctly, would be where the hostages were supposed to be rescued from. He was fairly sure that Daphne was going to be his hostage, not that he was 100% sure of that fact. They had hardly been speaking to each other since the ball, despite their study sessions and their attempt at dealing with the issue between them. Shaking his head, Harry got back to the problem at hand. Regardless of who it was, a hostage for him to rescue was going to be placed in the depths of the lake, in the middle of February, no less. Even now he could feel the cold seeping from the water towards him, making him pull his hands inside his jumper and wrap his arms around him. In theory, he knew that all he really needed to do was to stick a toe in the water, and that be that. Task done. But Sirius was right. These people liked a show, which was probably why he'd gotten at least a small amount of respect after the first task. Despite the fact that he was using Parseltongue, he was-talking to a dragon. It didn't get to be much more of a show than that. Idly, he went through all that he now knew about the lake. There were magical creatures in there, creatures that he had no idea how to combat if they decided to turn nasty. There was a giant squid, apparently named Marvin, according to the weird blonde girl in Ravenclaw, Luna. He thought her name was that Hermione had explained to her from the said blonde. Harry knew that he stood no chance of surviving in the lake for 5 minutes, let alone for an hour. He didn't know how to cast the bubblehead charm that he'd read about that would allow him to breathe underwater. He couldn't do any type of self-transfiguration. Even if he went back to London and bought some diving gear, there was no way that he'd work out how to use it in the small amount of time that he had until the task. Oh, there was that water plant that Neville had found, gillyweed or some such thing. But there was no way that Harry was going to eat some unknown plant in the hope that it would work, assuming that he could even get a hold of some. Not to mention the fact that Harry had no idea how to swim. It wasn't exactly something that the Dursleys had ever encouraged, especially when the alternative was so much more attractive if he ever fell into a river or something. No, it looked as though Harry's only option was the old toe in the water trick. Scooping down, he plucked up a rock and threw it out as far into the water as he could. Seeing the satisfying splash, he picked up a handful more and threw them all, one after the other. But it was while he was doing so that something caught his attention, the cliff face that budded up against the water that the castle rested upon. And part-way down on one side were the vines that covered the little cave that Hagrid had told him about. The germ of an idea caught his attention, and he froze in his rock tossing. It was definitely something that could be classed as putting on a show, and he definitely thought that he could do it, not that he'd ever done anything like it before in his life, but he'd heard about it, read about it, seen it being done even. Unfortunately, it'd mean a trip back to London, but he wasn't a Hogwarts student and was even considered an adult in this crazy world, so that wouldn't stop him. Glancing at his watch, Harry nodded his head. If he hurried, he could be there and back well before dinner. /0v0 / Thursday, 23 February 1995. Fourth floor corridor, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Daphne wasn't sure exactly what she was doing. She'd just come out of the library, a place that she'd only been in for less than 10 minutes, and for the life of her, she couldn't remember exactly what had drawn her to the place in the first place. All of her homework was up to date. She had no ongoing projects that required information that only a trip the library could provide, and none of her friends were in there. And there was probably the problem. One look around the library had told her that there was no messy-haired boy sitting at a table, half buried in books. She wasn't even aware that she'd been looking for Harry until her shoulders had slumped and she'd realized why. The two of them had been cordial to each other over the past month and a half. Each of their study sessions had been efficient, and he'd soaked up her help and tutelage as he always had. But there was something missing. The friendship and rapport that they'd built before Christmas was gone. Finding herself near one of the many glassed windows on the floor, she slumped against its side, her eyes staring out unseeingly at the school grounds and the forbidden forest beyond it. She'd cursed Hagrid every day since the ball. For that matter, she'd cursed herself, too. Hagrid's overtures to the Beauxbatons' headmistress couldn't have come at a worse time. The fact that Harry and her had overheard them, and that it had led to conversation, turned what had been an enchanted evening, if one ignored Harry's atrocious dress sense, into something disastrous. Exactly what had made her say what she did when she knew that she was talking to the Muggle-Raised Harry Potter was beyond her. The best that she could come up with was the fact that she was feeling comfortable, so comfortable, in fact, that she'd let her defenses down. And then they'd argued. If you could really call it arguing when she'd mouthed off and Harry had simply walked away. And no matter how hard she tried, no matter the conversation that they'd had trying to clear the air, nothing was the same. Daphne couldn't help but feel that she'd lost the potential for something truly amazing that night. A flicker of movement on the grounds below her caught her attention, and she straightened slightly, even as her eyes finally focused on the scene outside. A figure with extremely familiar messy hair and wearing glasses that the moonlight caught and reflected briefly back towards her was walking hurriedly across the grounds. Something swung from his left hand, and her brows creased as she tried to puzzle it out. Is that a bucket? She wondered. What in Merlin's name is Harry doing heading towards the forbidden forest with a bucket in his hand at this time of night, especially the night before the second task? The sound of footsteps in the corridor behind her interrupted her musings, and she looked around. Miss Greengrass, Professor Snape drawled. Professor, she replied, inclining her head respectfully to her head of house. I need you to come with me, he instructed. Yes, sir, she replied. May I ask why? That will be explained to you once we are there, Professor Snape replied. As Professor Snape began to lead her away, Daphne took one last look out the window, trying to spot Harry. It took her a couple of seconds of searching before her eyes found him. A dark lump hunkered down at the base of a tree on the edge of the forbidden forest. Chapter 22. Gone Fishing. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Friday, 24 February 1995. The Black Lake, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It was a grim-faced group of champions that Harry found standing just to the side of the starting line at the Black Lake, where the second task would take place. "Hi, guys," Harry said as he joined them. "Harry," Cedric greeted solemnly. Fleur and Victor settled for nods. "Is something wrong?" Harry asked tentatively. Cedric gave him a hard look before he seemed to wilt. "Cho's missing." "Hermione is also missing," Victor stated, a scowl making his face seem more hawk-like than it usually was. Harry's eyes flicked to Fleur, who shrugged. "Zir must be Zomione chosen for moi, Aussie, but it is not my date from Z-Ball." "Any idea who your hostage is, Harry?" Cedric asked. Harry looked up into the stands that surrounded the Black Lake, now filled with Hogwarts students. Immediately, his eyes found the green and silver section before focusing in on Tracy Davis, a Tracy who continued to look wildly about, as though searching for someone. The fact that her best friend wasn't by her side and hadn't been at breakfast either told who she was looking for. "Daphne," he replied. Cedric's face took on a look of confusion. "I know the two of you went to the ball together, but I thought that you had a falling out or something." "We did, sort of," Harry replied before waving it away. "Doesn't really matter, does it? The organizers obviously thought that she'd be the something that I'd miss the most." Come along, time to get ready," a bustling Ludo bagman interrupted. At his insistence, the four of them moved across from where they were standing to the very shore of the Black Lake. Percy Weasley officiously made sure that they were all standing in the correct place, with a precise 5 meters between each of them. While Mr. Bagman explained the task to the audience, Harry looked across at the three real champions. Each of them had now shrugged off their outer robes, leaving them in their swimming gear, their wands held firmly in their hands. Harry, though, didn't bother taking off even his jumper. He had no intention of getting wet in the slightest. When the other three shifted positions, as though they were about to start running, Harry decided that he probably should be paying attention. "Okay," Mr. Bagman's enhanced voice called. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. From the corner of his eyes, Harry saw Victor race off towards the water, his wand a blur in his hand as he pointed it at himself. Cedric and Fleur were seconds behind him, each performing some sort of motion with their wand that included circling their own head. Harry, though, simply raised his own Rowan and Willow wand and pushed with his magic, not towards himself or even out towards the depths of the Black Lake. Instead, Harry's wand was pointed more along the shoreline. From the direction that his wand indicated, a fast-moving brown blur appeared from amongst the vines at the base of the cliff below the castle, only to resolve itself into one of the school's many small boats. Before the last of the other three champions, Fleur, had finished disappearing below the waters of the Black Lake, Harry's summoned boat had come to rest with its nose pulled up slightly onto the shore. Taking a running jump, Harry launched himself over the prow of the boat, coincidentally also pushing the boat back out to bob more fully on the water. The boat rocked alarmingly under him, causing him to shoot his hands out to either side and freeze in place. Thankfully, the wild rocking quickly settled, and Harry felt safe enough to clamber about until he was able to plunk himself on the middle seat. A quick glance down was enough to ensure him that the items that he'd left in the bottom of the boat before dawn that morning were still there. Then, with Hagrid's instructions clear in his mind, he shifted around enough to tap the stern of his boat with his wand. Immediately, the boat heeled to one side as it pirouetted in place until its bow was pointing straight out into the middle of the lake. The soft swish off the water under the bow indicated that his journey had begun. In a surprisingly short amount of time, the boat glided to a halt in the very middle of the Black Lake. Harry waited, casting his eyes about nervously to ensure that the boat really had stopped. But apart from a small bob to one side, corresponding with the waves from the wind, the boat really had come to rest. With a smile to himself, Harry slipped from his seat to kneel on the bottom of the boat. Even that small movement was enough to send the boat rocking and to make his book bag tip over onto its side. His eyes narrowed at it. There was no way that he was willing for any iciness to get on his favorite bag. So, in one swift movement, he picked it up and deposited it over the other side of the seat, closer to the stern. The long, thin canvas case was the next to come to hand. This Harry upended, causing two fiberglass poles to slide out of it. Carefully, he slid the two ends together and twisted it to line up the guides. After that, it was a case of threading the fishing line from the reel through the guides and pulling enough down to attach the sinker and hook exactly like he'd been shown. The end result wasn't exactly pretty, but Harry figured that it would do. Next, of course, came the gross part. Uncovering the small pail that he'd jammed under one of the seats, Harry stared at the mass of wiggling brown worms. Wrinkling his nose, he plunged his hand in, grasped one and pulled it out. Then came a trial and error of comedies, as he tried to thread the worm onto the hook without looking at it or thinking about the tiny worm screams that he imagined coming from his ministrations. Eventually, he decided that it was good enough, and in one uncoordinated attempt, he flicked the rod over his head and forward, sending hook, worm, and sinker about 5 meters out from the boat. Satisfied with his efforts, Harry sat down on the middle seat and prepared to waste the next 50 or so minutes sitting out in the middle of the black lake doing nothing but staring at the fishing line in his hand. Whenever the subject of fishing had come up at either the Dursleys or at Keating's, one truth seemed to prevail. Fishing was a great waste of time, a lot of effort for next to no results. Unfortunately for Harry, it seemed that the Potter luck was once more with him. He'd barely settled himself in what he hoped would be a comfortable position when the tip of his rod jiggled. He stared at it. Surely not. He managed to think right before the rod tip jerked, nearly bending in two and shooting out of his hand. Instinctively, Harry held on for all that he was worth, and then he did the unthinkable. Harry Potter began fighting with the reel, attempting to reel whatever was on the end of his fishing line into the boat. A flash of silver followed by a great splash of a tail that sent a rain of water up and into the boat told him that whatever he'd hooked was close. Leaning backwards, he gave one last mighty heave on the reel, and then he stared, his mouth dropping open in astonishment. Wriggling and flapping about on the end of his fishing line was the biggest fish that he'd ever seen. It had to be at least 40 centimeters, maybe 50. What species it was eluded him. He'd never in his wildest dreams imagined actually catching a fish. Then, with one last massive jerk, the fish slipped from the hook, only to fall into the bottom of the boat. Harry's feet came up in a flash as he stared at the incredible sight. The thing flipped and flopped every which way, its movements becoming ever more frantic and jerky before it finally stilled. Well, mostly stilled. There was still the occasional wiggle of its tail. Staring back at his hook, Harry found only glinting silver. With a shrug, he dipped his hand back into the bucket below his feet, carefully worked another worm onto the hook, and cast his line out once more. Within minutes, the tip of his rod was again jerking up and down. This time, though, Harry was prepared. He waited until there was a much deeper dip before he ripped the rod straight up into the air. And then, once again, the fight was on. His hands and shoulder muscles were beginning to ache by the time the second fish, this one slightly smaller than the first, was on the bottom of the boat. After that, it became almost repetitive. Bait the hook, throw the line in, wait a couple of minutes, feel the line being tugged, jerk and fight the fish to, and then up and into the boat. The only thing that he could think of was that he must have parked the tiny boat right over the top of a school of whatever these fish were. That, and maybe the fact that these fish had never seen anything like a worm dropping into the water like that before in their lifetime. Within half an hour, Harry had forgotten all about the contest that he was in. He was much too excited about the 7 fish lying in the bottom of the boat at his feet. Harry was just about to cast his line out again when an unexpected splash came from the waters right behind him. Thinking that there must be an extremely curious fish jumping about, he turned around. What he saw, though, caused him to drop his rod. Not even the clatter that it made as it bounced around the bottom boards was enough for him to realize what had happened. No, Harry's whole focus was on the head bobbing in the water staring back at him. Whatever it was nothing like Harry had ever seen before. For a start, its skin was mottled grey, making him think that someone had died in the lake and was only now bobbing back to the surface. That was until he saw it blink its yellow eyes at him. Its long, sea-green hair hung limply against its head and shoulders before flaring out in the water. Its mouth opened wide, and a piercing shriek erupted from it, causing Harry to clap his hands over his ears to block out the sound. Only then did he realize what he was staring at, a merperson. "Ah, hello," Harry tried once the unholy racket had stopped. The merperson blinked at him before once again opening its mouth and sending forth a screech to make the sound of nails raking down a blackboard appear the sweetest sound in existence. When Harry finally managed to peek through his screwed-up eyes, he noticed that the merperson was gesturing with its mottled grey, webbed hand. It took Harry nearly a minute before he realized what the being meant. Harry needed to stick his head in the water. Oddly enough, that actually made sense. He'd been able to understand the egg's wail when his head had been underwater. Harry peered at the side of the boat before shaking his head and climbing over the seat to reach the stern of the boat. Then, while kneeling on the rear seat and keeping his hands anchored to the side, he leant over as far as he could until his entire head had been dunked into the water. Immediately, Harry gasped at the shock of cold and pulled his head back up. Even from just that brief instant, he'd begun to shiver, his breaths coming in great heaves. At once, the merperson emerged from the water once more, a frown clear on its face. Sucking in a breath, Harry clenched his jaw and plunged his head back under the water. The sight that met his eyes was of a half-human, half-fish hybrid that, oddly enough, or perhaps not so oddly enough, looked right at home in the water. In the water it was hard to tell, but Harry suspected that the merman would be as tall as Hagrid if they could stand side by side. This time, when the merman opened its mouth, Harry was able to understand him. No fin can understand Flish in water. Flish can understand no fin in air. Harry puzzled that one out and nodded his upside-down head. It seemed that they could communicate if only one of them did the talking in each environment. "What no fin do to Silverfin?" the merman asked. Harry gasped as he pulled his head back out the water, instinctively giving his head a flick to get rid of the worst of the water. Even with that dog shake, he still grimaced as he felt rivulets of water running down his neck and under his jumper and shirt. "I'm fishing," Harry replied to the question that he'd been asked. Catching the fish to eat later." That was a good enough explanation, seeing as though Headed plan on giving the fish to the Hogwarts house elves to cook up. At Flish's gesture, Harry plunged his head over the transom of the boat once more. "Why you do this? No Finn should be getting his air breather from village," Flish stated. "I would if I could," Harry replied once they were once more above water. "But I can't breathe underwater, so I'm just wasting time until the competition is over, and then one of your people could bring her back up." Once again, Harry had to endure the freezing temperature of the water to hear what the merman had to say to him. "You should know take Silverfin. Belong to mermen. Ancient agreement." When Harry was next above water, the first thing that he did was to cast his eye on the fish laying in the bottom of the boat. He didn't know that fishing in the lake was off limits, but maybe he could use that. It was a crazy idea, and definitely went against his idea of not trying in the tournament, but it couldn't hurt to ask, right? Filch, I'm sorry about taking the silver fins," he said. "I didn't know about the agreement. I'll give them back to you if you do me a favor, though." Filch's eyes narrowed slightly before he waved one grey, webbed hand that Harry took as him asking what the favor was. "If you bring Daphne, my air breather, up to me from the village. I'll give you all of the silver fins that I caught." Harry watched hopefully as Flish seemed to consider the bargain. Then, with an elegant flip that ended with a tail slap on top of the water, the merman disappeared. Harry was left sitting in the slightly rocking boat, wondering what exactly had just happened. Obviously, the merman had come to a decision, but what that was, he had no idea. Really, it could go a number of ways. Flish could actually do as he asked, or he could have been insulted to such a degree that he was off to find reinforcements to deal with the vile. No fin. Or perhaps he just had enough and decided to go back to whatever it was he was doing before Harry's fishing interrupted him. Before his thoughts could run any further, Flish re-emerged, only to point one webbed finger back into the water. Taking this as a good sign, Harry leant over the side of the boat. "What your air breather look like?" Flish asked. The instant that Harry was above water again, he dove towards his ever-present satchel. Then, trying to be careful not to get everything inside it wet, he pulled out his sketch pad and began madly flipping through it. "This," he said, holding up one particular drawing. "This is Daphne, my air breather." Flish stared hard at it for a couple of moments before sinking beneath the water. And then Harry simply had to wait. It was a long wait and felt 10 times longer than it really was, what with there being nothing for him to do. He couldn't fish anymore, and there was no way that he was going to sketch anything with wet hands and dripping hair. Whittling would have been a good distraction, that was, if he'd thought to keep some wood and his knife in his satchel. Well, that was something to remedy later. An unexpected surge of water just to the side of the boat announced, hopefully, the return of Flish a quarter of an hour later. In his eagerness, Harry nearly jumped to his feet, only remembering at the last minute how disastrous that could have been. And then a pair of heads emerged from the water, one with long, limp sea-green hair, the other with deep ebony hair. The instant that Daphne's face emerged from the water, she took a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes looked wildly about her. A short, high-pitched shriek sounded the instant that she caught sight of who, or rather, what was holding her. She splashed and struggled, trying to get away. "Daphne, Daphne, it's all right. It's only Flish. He brought you up from the Merpeople village," Harry tried to explain to the thrashing girl. "Harry," she asked, looking wildly about until she spotted him and the boat that he was sitting in. Harry smiled as he leant as far over the side of the boat as he could, reaching out with one hand towards her. After a brief glance back at the merman behind her, Daphne reached up and grabbed hold, allowing him to pull her in so that she could hold on to the side of the boat. Beyond her, Flish was making urgent gestures between Harry, the boat, Daphne, and himself. "Just a sec, Daph. I'll be right back," Harry said. Ignoring her confused look and indignant, "What?" he moved towards the front of the boat and began to pick up the slippery silver fish and throw them over the side. Once they were all gone, Flish nodded and promptly disappeared. "Thank you," Harry called after the disappearing merman. "Harry," Daphne insisted, "get me out of here." "Sorry, Daph," Harry said, shuffling around in the boat. One look at the way, the boat was already tilting dangerously towards the water where Daphne was enough to tell Harry that pulling her in over the side of the boat was a very bad idea. "Can you shuffle around to the back of the boat?" he asked. With a huff of annoyance, she did so. Harry used the time to wash away the slimy fish feeling from his hands. As soon as Daphne was in place, he set his feet as best as he could before reaching down and grasping her under her arms. Then, with a major heave, he hauled her up and over the transom. Daphne gasped as she fell into the boat. Immediately, she started shivering, wrapping her arms around herself. Her everyday robes were gone, leaving her in just her stockings, skirt, and school shirt. All items that Harry noticed were plastered to her body, accenting her curves in a very flattering way. Hurriedly, Harry pulled off his jumper. It was still mostly dry, and she needed it a lot more than he did. "G give me why your W on," Daphne stuttered, her teeth chattering in the bitingly cold air. Immediately, Harry flicked it out of his wand holster and held it out to her along with his jumper. He watched closely as she waved it over herself in a swirling motion, making most of the water siphon off of her. She was still damp, especially her long hair, but at least she wasn't as likely to freeze to death now. "Can we get back to shore so that I can warm up?" Daphne asked. "Definitely," Harry replied, and after taking back his wand, he tapped it thrice on the end of the boat, picturing where he wanted the boat to go in his mind. "Right, I've just got to ask," Daphne said, as the shore gradually came closer. "Did Yaubheim from the Merpeople?" "I wouldn't say buy," Harry grinned at her. "Bartered for their assistance, maybe, but not buy." "Aha," she replied, clearly unconvinced of the differentiation. "Hey, it was the only way that I could get you up from the bottom of the lake," Harry replied. "I'm sure that you wouldn't have preferred that I justly vow there if I had another option, right?" "No, I wouldn't," she said. Then, in a softer voice, "Thank you, Harry." "You're welcome. That's what friends are for," he replied. Any comment that she may have responded with was interrupted by the boat grounding on the shore and a set of faces appearing around them. "Out of the way," a huffing Madame Pomfrey commanded, pushing Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch to one side. "That girl has been in the freezing water for Merlin knows how long and is likely to come down with pneumonia." Within seconds, she had hustled Daphne from the boat, wrapping her in a huge, thick blanket, and began guiding her towards the tent set aside for the healer. "I'll want to see you as well, Mr. Potter," she called over her shoulder. "Best not to keep her waiting, Harry?" Mr. Bagman grinned. "We'll give you your scores once all of the other champions have returned." Harry nodded as he clambered from the boat. Fleur, he noticed, was already back. She was currently standing right on the edge of the water, wringing her hands as she stared worriedly at the lake. Feeling himself give a rather violent shiver, Harry left his wondering about his fellow champions until later. He desperately needed to get dry and warm, and something hot to drink wouldn't go astray either, he decided firmly. Chapter 23. Hero Champion Bilpair. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Friday, 24 February 1995. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Lemon drop, Harry," the headmaster of Hogwarts offered, gesturing to the crystal bowl placed on the edge of his immaculate desk. "Thank you, no," Harry replied, sitting back in his chair. His eyes darted around the room, unsure exactly why he was there. The second task of the TriWizard tournament had only finished a couple of hours before. There had been enough time for Harry to get a bite to eat and to celebrate with his friends that it was over, and the fact that he'd actually finished the task within the time limit, the only champion to do so, when he was informed that his presence was requested in the headmaster's office. And even though it was stated as a request, Harry knew that Professor McGonagall, the one to deliver the message, meant it as an order. Thoughts of a long, long hot shower were subsequently pushed aside in favor of doing as he was told. "I thought that we might discuss your performance in the task," Dumbledore said, sitting back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his intent blue eyes. Harry nodded slowly. "Would you like to tell me how you accomplished the task?" Dumbledore asked. "I thought that you already knew that," Harry replied, "that the Merchieftainess told you what happened." It took a fair bit of self-control for Harinato shudder at even the memory of the two, Merperson and Old Wizard, shrieking at each other at the water's edge in voices that would have done fingernails on a blackboard proud. "Ah, yes, Merchieftainess Mercus did tell me what she knew," Dumbledore allowed, "but I would like to hear it in your own words." Harry stared at the old man, confused. What did it matter how he'd done it? It was a fluke, after all, and the task was finished now, soon to be forgotten in favor of all the speculation of what the third task was going to be. Even so, he decided to humor the old man, that could possibly one day be his headmaster. Well, when I worked out what the second task was, Harry began slowly, I knew that I'd have no chance of completing it. I'd have to rescue something or Somione from the bottom of the lake in the middle of winter. What led you to believe that you would be unable to complete the task? Dumbledore asked. Harry stared at the man. The hostages were at the bottom of a lake, he repeated. How was I supposed to get down there, let alone rescue whoever you put down there for me? I don't know how to swim, and unlike Cedric, Victor, and Fleur, I don't have nearly 7 years of magical education to help me out. Apart from a handful of spells, I'm barely halfway through learning the first-year curriculum. Surely you could have researched a way to survive underwater and then practiced it, Dumbledore suggested. Harry waved the suggestion away. Tried it. Failed. And as for that weed that Neville told me about, well, there was no way I was going to eat something like that and dive into a freezing cold lake without knowing exactly what was going to happen. So you had no intention of rescuing Miss Greengrass? Dumbledore asked incredulously. Nope, Harry replied, shaking his head. I figured that you wouldn't have put them down there if they weren't going to be safe. Only an idiot would have believed that line about them being lost forever if they weren't retrieved within the time limit. Dumbledore seemed to be turning that statement over in his mind as he stared at Harry. Almost of its own volition, an ancient hand snaked forward, plucked a lemon drop from the bowl, and popped it into the waiting mouth. That is not the actions of a hero or a champion, Dumbledore finally stated. Harry's eyes goggled at the man. I'm not a proper champion, and I'm definitely not a hero. All that boy, who lived garbage, is bad enough without trying to add to it needlessly. Dumbledore appeared to wince at Harry's forceful statement. If you had no intention of rescuing Miss Greengrass, what, may I ask, was your plan for the task? The headmaster asked. Just the thought of that brought a grin to Harry's face. Well, when I realized that you were going to have everyone sitting in stands on the shore of the lake and stare at it for an hour in the freezing cold, I decided to put on a bit of a show for them. Admittedly, watching someone fish isn't much of a show, but it's got to be better than staring at a lake for an hour. Fishing? Your entire plan was to go fishing? Dumbledore asked incredulously. Yep, didn't expect to catch anything if truth be told. That was a bit of a shock, let me tell you, Harry replied. Although not as much of a shock as Flish's head popping out of the water was. And then you decided to be a hostage back from the merpeople? Dumbledore asked, looking as though he wanted to bury his face in his hands. No, not by. I wish people would stop saying that. Daphne's going to skin me alive if she thinks that I simply bother, Harry protested. It trade the fish that I'd caught for Flish's help with completing the task. Again, I must point out that paying someone else to do the hard work does not a champion or hero make, Dumbledore said. Harry narrowed his eyes at the man. What is it with you and the idea of me being a hero? Yeah, I'm a champion, but we both know that that's in name only. I was never going to compete properly, just do enough to get through the tasks and be able to keep my magic. Dumbledore sighed. Yes, that is the agreement. It would be nice to actually see you try, though, to rise to the occasion, as it were. Yeah, if wishes were fishes, I'd have a boat full, Harry replied, grinning at the memory of the fish that he'd caught lying in the bottom of the boat. Well, perhaps in the third task, Dumbledore suggested hopefully. You did manage to come third in this task. 30 points, while not many, is a vast improvement upon your score from the first task. Yeah, well, considering that I only performed one spell and got Flish to rescue Daphne for me, I wasn't expecting that many, not that it matters all that much, Harry agreed. I shall let you go now, Mr. Potter. I'm sure that Miss Greengrass will be wanting to thank you for providing the means to remove her from the bottom of the lake, Dumbledore said. But do think about what I have said, especially in light of the upcoming third task. I'll do that, Harry replied, not meaning a word of it. /0v0 / Friday, 24 February 1995. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Taking a step back, Harry eyed the canvas before him. It was coming along slowly but surely, but there was still something off with it, not that he was too concerned with that yet. He'd had the same thing happen a number of times before, and it'd always work itself out. Usually, it was at about the same stage, too, when he was still outlining the intended painting in chalk. This one was intended to be a bit simpler than his last one, and there definitely wouldn't be any animating it either. He was sure that he'd destroy the thing within a day if he had to listen to a merman shrieking in there above water voices. No, the painting that he was going to do of Flish's head bobbing in the water, the shore of the black like an indistinct haze in the distance, was going to be simpler. And like the painting of Ramaranth, it was simply a memento of the second task, something that he could keep, something besides that accused golden egg that was once more hidden in the depths of one of his cupboards. Ramaranth, too, had finally, grudgingly approved, especially when it was explained to her that the painting wasn't going to be animated. Apparently dragons and merpeople didn't get along. A fact evidenced by Ramaranth's threats to invade Flish's canvas and to eat the merman if they were placed in the same room, let alone on the same wall. Knock, knock, knock. Harry stilled, his hand frozen as he was in the process of raising the chalk once more. Even without checking, he knew who was at the door. He'd been avoiding this meeting all afternoon, firstly with a half-hour hot shower and then with the canvas and potential painting. But of course, it was inevitable. He knew that she'd eventually seek him out. The problem was that Harry wasn't sure what to expect from the conversation. The thing he'd miss the most. Yeah, that could be taken so many different ways it wasn't funny. And the fact that she'd allowed it happen spoke volumes as well. Harry wasn't exactly sure what his relationship with Daphne was anymore. She was his tutor, and before the Yule Ball fiasco, they'd become friends. Harry'd entertained the idea of exploring if there could be more there, but that conversation at the ball had killed that idea. Well, mostly killed that idea. Since then, they'd gone from wariness, where they would hardly look at each other, let alone talk to each other, to slowly repairing their friendship. Their tutorial sessions had finally lost their awkwardness and become more like they used to be. But now, after Daphne being labeled as the thing he'd missed the most. Knock, knock, knock. Either Sir Roderick or Daphne were getting impatient. Sighing, Harry laid the piece of chalk down and went to answer the door. The tiniest flicker of nervousness in Daphne's eyes as he opened the door was gone in an instant, masked in her usual way, just like most of her emotions, leaving Harry wondering if he'd imagined it. Her long black hair, now shiny and full-bodied once more, lay about her shoulders, delicate wisps framing her face. Currently, her arms were wrapped about her hands and fingers almost completely hidden in the sleeves of her dark green jumper, whether in nervousness or cold Harry couldn't be sure. "Daphne," he finally said. "Harry, may I come in?" she asked. With a nod, Harry stepped aside, opening the door wider for her. Then, after a quick word of thanks to his door's guardian, he closed the door and followed his visitor into his room. At first, Daphne seemed to be headed for the lounge area and the fire blazing merrily away in the fireplace, but her steps quickly altered when she spotted the easel and canvas set up near the window. Harry eyed her warily. He'd never been comfortable showing off his artwork, especially when it was still in such an early stage of development. Her head cocked to the side as she examined it before she turned, her brilliant blue eyes connecting with his own emerald greens. "The merman who brought me up from the village?" she asked. "Flish, yes," he replied. "I look forward to seeing it finished," she replied. Daphne straightened then, as though what she had to say next was more formal. "Thank you for what you did to get me up from the bottom of the lake," she said. "I am in your debt." Harry shook his head. "No, you're not. I didn't really do anything. It was all plain, dumb luck anyway." He looked away then, trying to order the words in his head. Never mind the fact that he'd been having this very conversation in his head over and over for the last few hours. I knew that I had no chance of getting to you at the bottom of lake, so all I had planned was to do a bit of fishing while I waited out the time. And then Filch appeared, and I was able to make a deal where he could bring you up for me. So youted by me, Daphne stated. And it wasn't until Harry was in the midst of a massive panicky denial that he saw the edges of her lips twitch. That twitch quickly became a full-on smile before she burst out into laughter. "Oh, Harry, you are so easy to wind up," she said through her laughter. "Neville told me what you'd really done. How'd he put it? That you'd trade the fish that you'd caught for the merman's help with completing the task." "Yes, that was it." Harry nodded emphatically. "That's right," he said. "It trade for some help I didn't buy you." "Relax, Harry, I understand," she assured him, patting him on the chest. "And I do understand and appreciate that fact that you took the opportunity to get me out of that lake as soon as it presented itself." Harry couldn't help but smile. Every scenario that he'd imagined had her fixating on the buying aspect of it and consequently tearing strips into him for it. At his gesture, they moved across to the lounge chairs in front of the fire. How'd you end up in the lake in the first place?" Harry asked carefully. "Did you volunteer?" Immediately, Daphne's face darkened and she scowled. "No, I certainly did not volunteer. I didn't even know that I was going Tobias hostage until I woke up when I surfaced in the lake." "Then what happened?" Harry asked, wide-eyed. "I remember Professor Snape finding me in the corridor last night," she recounted. "He said that I had to go with him. I remember that he led me to the headmaster's office, but apart from that, nothing." "Nothing?" Harry asked. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "Well, the circular moving staircase and the headmaster's door and then a flash of red light. But other than that, no, nothing." "They didn't even ask you if you were willing to participate in the task as my hostage?" Harry asked. "No," Daphne stated. Do you think that they got permission from your parents?" he asked. Daphne seemed to think about that for a moment before shaking her head. "No, I can't see my father giving permission for that. He'd already told me that he'd prefer that I didn't get too close to you," she confessed. Harry wasn't quite sure what to make of that statement and decided that now wasn't the time to dwell on it. Instead, he tucked it away for later thought. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "For what?" she asked. "For getting you mixed up in all of this," Harry replied. "I'm pretty sure that they used the champion's dates as hostages. Well, apart from Fleur, of course." Seeing the tiny silver-haired girl being brought up from the lake had been quite a shock not only to Harry, but to quite a few others, judging by the gasps that he'd heard at the time. "Not your fault, Harry," she told him. "I don't blame you in the slightest. I blame Snape and Dumbledore and whoever else is involved in the running of the tournament." Harry nodded, a tiny smile on his face. This conversation had gone so much better than he'd imagined. "So tell me more about what I missed this morning," Daphne said. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry, she noticed, had once more done his normal trick after some momentous event. The first task and the Yule Ball came quickly to mind, and failed to make an appearance at breakfast in the Great Hall. Looking around the hall at everyone calmly eating their breakfast, she decided that it didn't look all that dissimilar to a normal Saturday at Hogwarts. Groups of students were animatedly talking together. The Ravenclaws were eating with books propped up in front of them, and the professors all looked relaxed. Even after Harry's bizarre showing in the second task of the TriWizard, and she still couldn't believe that he'd actually finished not only first, but inside the time limit, no less. The castle's inhabitants seemed to be taking it simply as another one of those weird things Harry does. And although Daphne herself had garnered a fair bit of interest at dinner last night, This morning things seemed to be back to normal. The subsequent arrival of the post owls, and with it the daily prophet, quickly abused her of the notion that the world was going to carry on as usual. Or perhaps it was more that the usual state of things had only had a temporary reprieve. The front page and lead article off prophet had everyone glued to it. Boy who lived pays merman to get the job done by Rita Skeeter. Yesterday saw the second task of the TriWizard tournament being held at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This task involved the champions having to solve a clue hidden inside the golden egg from the first task. This clue then led the champions to the depths of Hogwarts Black Lake, from which the champions had to rescue a hostage being held in the center of the Merpeople's village. But when 3 of the champions raced into the water to rescue their hostages using either the Bubblehead charm or Invicta Crumb's case advanced transfiguration, Harry Potter decided to go fishing instead of attempting to rescue his hostage. Yes, you read that right, my dear readers. The boy who lived forsook the Greengrass heiress in favor of a favored Muggle pastime. Luckily for young Miss Greengrass, Harry Potter's violation of the ancient agreement between Hogwarts and the Merpeople garnered the attention of one of the Merpeople. It is this reporter's understanding that negotiations then took place, which led to the merman's rescuing the boy who lived's hostage. Harry Potter paid for this service with fish. Harry Potter, along with his hostage, and coincidentally his date for the Yule Ball, Daphne Greengrass, was the first and only champion to complete the task within the allotted time limit. Thankfully, the judges saw through Harry Potter's ambivalence to the task and awarded the points accordingly. Potter was given the second lowest score, only beating out Miss Delacour of Beauxbatons, as she failed to complete the task at all. Let us hope, dear readers, that the boy who lived decides to actually try in the third and final task and be the champion that we all expected him to be. Daphne dropped the paper onto the tabletop in disgust. Once again, Skeeter had done a marvelous job of reporting the facts in a way that disparaged and turned the general public against the person the article was about. Nowhere in there did it mention that Harry couldn't swim or that his magical knowledge was only comparable to a first-year student. Miss Greengrass, a voice interrupted her musings. Looking up and around, Daphne had to clamp down on her murderous thoughts of the one who'd caused her to end up at the bottom of the lake. Thankfully, her emotionless mask hid her true thoughts, or at least she hoped that it did. "Yes, Professor," she replied. "Your father is waiting for you in the entrance hall," Professor Snape said. Immediately, her face drained of color. This, she knew, wasn't going to be pleasant. Chapter 24. The Legalities of the Second Task. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. Entrance Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Daphne Greengrass was the epitome of a self-assured pureblood, raised in all of the traditions of old, a girl who projected an air of being better than all, of seeing all those around her as being unimportant. At least that is what the blank expression on her face and the upright posture and assured steps cried out to all around her as she stepped from the great hall into the entrance hall. The truth was somewhat different. Daphne was trembling inside. Her father coming to see her at Hogwarts was unprecedented. Only the most dire of circumstances would see him here. That, or he was here to deliver the dressing down of dressing downs. She could only hope that his ire wasn't going to be directed at her. Either way, there was only one way to act, regardless of how she was feeling inside. Her occlumency shields were firmly in place, hiding her emotions deep inside. Her posture and bearing were correct in every way, exactly as she'd been taught. Outwardly, no one could tell that she was scared silly and dreading the forthcoming encounter with every fiber of her being. If she thought that she could get away with it, she'd run. Not that she had any reason to. She hadn't done anything wrong, no matter what the paper had implied. "Father," she said, as she came to a halt, the correct 5 paces from him. Cyrus Greengrass, Lord Greengrass, turned from where he was studying a tapestry and looked down his nose at his daughter, his bright blue eyes, the eyes that she'd inherited from him, seeming to pierce her very soul. He was dressed in his finest, his black acromantula silk robes pressed perfectly, the Greengrass signal clear for all to see on his left breast. His pants, like his cloak and dragon-hide boots, were also black, only his midnight blue shirt and charcoal grey vest giving any hint of color in today's outfit. All in all, a dark choice of clothing, and when matched with his carefully coiffed black hair with its touch of grey at the temples, it created a very imposing image. "Daphne," her father finally replied. He lifted his arm then, gesturing towards a corridor lined with classrooms. "Shall we find somewhere a little more private to hold our discussion?" "Certainly, father," Daphne replied with a respectful nod. She led him then in the directed direction, only stopping when she felt a tap on her shoulder as they drew adjacent to the 4th door along. Once inside the classroom, she waited while her father applied the appropriate charms to the walls and door to assure them of their privacy. Putting away his wand, Lord Greengrass whirled around to face his daughter. She stood firm under his gaze, keeping still even as he stroked his chin, his opposing hand supporting the elbow of the cocked hand. And then he slowly circled her. Throughout it all, Daphne knew what was expected of her, to stay perfectly still under his scrutiny. "You appear to have remembered your lessons," her father remarked when he was once again facing her, "but your behavior would belie that idea." "In what way has my behavior not met your standards, father?" Daphne asked, although she was fairly certain that she already knew the answer. Her father, though, countered her question with one of his own. "What were my instructions to you in the last letter that I sent you?" "To ensure that any interactions that I had with Harry Potter could not in any way tarnish my reputation or the reputation of the House of Greengrass," she replied. "Correct," her father replied. "In light of this, please explain your actions yesterday." "Yesterday was the second task of the TriWizard tournament," Daphne replied, believing that it was best to state the facts before she tried to defend herself, in which the champions were required to rescue a hostage from the Black Lake. I was placed at the bottom of the lake for Harry to rescue. In my defense, I would like to point out that I did not volunteer to be Harry's hostage, nor was I even asked if I would be willing to fulfill that role. I did not even know that that was what the task involved until I was revived when I emerged from the lake. Her father stared at her, obviously turning her answer over in his mind. "If that is the case, explain to me how you ended up at the bottom of the Black Lake," he instructed. "The evening prior to the task, Professor Snape found me and told me that my presence was required," she replied. "He did not tell Muhimi presence was required, only that it would be explained to me later. He led me to the headmaster's office, but I only vaguely remember walking in there before there was a flash of red light. I don't remember anything else until I woke up in Lake." "Are you telling me that you were used in the second task without either your or my permission?" Lord Greengrass asked incredulously. "Yes, father," she replied. She chewed her bottom lip for a moment, a clear violation of everything her mother had ever taught her, before deciding to give her father Harry's perspective on the task as well. "Harry said that he worked out pretty early on that I was his hostage, but due to his upbringing and his lack of magical knowledge, he was unable to do anything about rescuing me. However, when the opportunity presented itself for him to get me out of the lake quicker than the judges would have been able to, he took it, trading for the merman's help." "I see," her father said, his expression unreadable, at least where Harry was concerned. "It would appear that I was in error, daughter. I thought that you had disobeyed my instructions, but it seems that you're not the one that I should be having words with." She nodded, once again being careful to hide her emotions, even if it was simply one of relief. "I will leave you to your day. I'm sure that you have studying to do, her father said. He paused then before seeming to come to a decision. If you see Mr. Potter, give him my thanks for what he did for you. Yes, father, she replied, unable to hide her surprise. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Ah, Cyrus, come in, Albus Dumbledore greeted when he saw the man at the door of his office. Cyrus strode forward, his face set in an undefinable way, but that was not unexpected from the man. In all the years that Albus had known Lord Greengrass, stretching back to when the man was not, but a boy undertaking his schooling in the castle, Albus would be hard-pressed to remember a dozen times that the man had willingly shown his emotions to others. Of course, that thought led Albus along to the thought that the man's daughters were very similar, especially the older of the two, Daphne. This is not a social visit, Cyrus stated, taking a seat in the offered chair across the desk from Albus. No, Albus replied, his heart sinking as he realized what this meeting was going to entail. It would be so much easier, Albus mused, if people would learn to mind their places in the world. In this instance, Albus, as headmaster of Hogwarts, knew what he was doing with the students that he was responsible for. Cyrus Greengrass was at his best in the midst of a Wisengamot debate, often moderating both sides, the light and the dark, to something that society could live and progress with. No, Cyrus confirmed. I want to know how my daughter ended up at the bottom of the lake yesterday. Ah, Albus began, sitting back and tilting his head slightly, so that his twinkling eyes could look at the other man over the top of his half-moon spectacles. Well, you see, the task called for each champion to rescue a hostage, someone who they felt an emotional connection with, from the bottom of the Black Lake. And when it came to Mr. Potter, well, due to his short time back in the magical world, it was decided that the obvious choice was the one that he had taken to the Yule Ball as his date. I see, and who made this determination? Cyrus asked. I did, Albus replied simply. Without consulting either me or her mother, Cyrus asked. As her parents, and considering that Daphne is underage, I would have expected you to seek our permission before placing her in such a perilous position. But young Miss Greengrass was never in any danger, Albus countered. I performed the charm myself that would suspend your daughter's bodily functions, including her heart rate and her need to breathe, while she was underwater. The touch of air on her skin was enough to counter the charm and to begin her normal bodily functions once more. And you felt that this was safe for my teenage daughter? Cyrus asked, his voice rising in an uncharacteristic show of emotion. Perfectly, Albus replied, maintaining his calm demeanor in an effort to counter the other man's agitation. You had no right, Cyrus stated, slamming his fist onto the desk. Stopping my daughter's heart and her breathing is tantamount to killing her. You say that it was safe, but what if something had gone wrong? There were safeguards in place, Albus assured him. Merchieftainess Mercus herself was watching over the 4 hostages, and at the first indication of something being amiss, she would have brought the hostages to the surface. Cyrus stared at him, his mouth moving for nearly half a minute before he finally seemed to find his words once again. You were relying on a merman to ensure that there were no problems. They don't even breathe air. How would they know if there was a problem in the first place? I have every confidence in Merchieftainess Mercus, Albus stated in such a way as to ensure that the topic was closed. You still had no right to include my daughter in the second task without my permission, Cyrus said, repeating an earlier statement. I believe that you are in error there, Cyrus, Albus told the man. As headmaster, I am responsible for the students in my care and am empowered to decide whether or not they are allowed to participate in any activity within the bounds of the school, and the Black Lake is inside those bounds. It is no different than allowing a student to participate in a care of magical creatures, lesson on hippogriffs, if I deem the lesson safe enough. Cyrus seemed to deflate somewhat, and Albus smiled internally. It was always so very pleasing when others understood the power that he had been entrusted with. You're saying that because I agreed to send my daughter here to Hogwarts, that I also agreed to bow to your judgment in the appropriateness and inherent safety of a school-related activity, Cyrus said slowly. Correct, Albus smiled. Explain to me how stunning my daughter and placing her at the bottom of a lake without her knowledge also falls under that remit, Cyrus demanded. Albus faltered slightly. Perhaps that wasn't the wisest way of doing things, but it had been done, and there was nothing for it but to go forward. I determined that there was likely to be some resistance upon the part of the prospective hostages, resistance that could cause those students deep distress. In order to prevent this upset, I took the precaution of stunning them and performing the charms on their unconscious selves. The fact that none of the students were harmed nor have any expressed any dissatisfaction with the way that things were done leads me to believe that I prevented any undue stress upon their lives, he explained. Cyrus sat back in his chair, staring hard. An interesting interpretation, Cyrus finally said. Not one that I agree with in the slightest, though. It also sounds like something that I should take up with others to see if their interpretation of events corresponds to yours, if nothing else. For now, however, I expect to be informed of anything similar that you want to put either of my daughters through in the future. Failure to do so will result in their removal from Hogwarts. As you wish, Albus said, bowing his head in acquiescence, even as he didn't believe a word of it. Cyrus Greengrass may be currently upset, most likely from the bad light that the House of Greengrass was shown in Daily Prophet that morning. But he was certain that nothing would make the man pull his daughters from the premier school of magic in the country. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. Office of the Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Ministry of Magic, London. Amelia Bones stared across her desk at Cyrus Greengrass. Ordinarily, she had little to do with the other man. Even when they were in the Wisengamot chambers together, their seats and occasionally their views were set apart. But one thing that she'd always known about the man: he did what he thought was right, even if that meant going against his friends or the mainstream. Plus the fact that he'd never shown any interest in aligning himself with the extreme pureblood faction, not even during the war when they were winning in every conceivable way possible. And that made her trust the man even more. That wasn't to say that Cyrus Greengrass didn't always support the pureblood way of thinking, for he did. But it was more than that. It was their very culture, their way of life, that he sought to promote. He'd made it clear that his position was that if the Muggle-born and half-blood wanted to join magical society, that was fine and all to magical Britain's gain. But those same people needed to learn about their culture and adjust to it. They were the ones coming in. Therefore they should be the ones to change to fit in. And now he'd brought her a potential Kneasel's worth of trouble. One of the most powerful wizards in their society, both magically and politically, had skirted the law. Oh, a case could be made for Albus Dumbledore having broken it, but it would be a hard sell, and not only because of who had bent said law. She'd listened to Cyrus' tale and taken her usual copious amounts of notes, and she could see his side of things. But she also knew exactly how much leeway the headmaster of Hogwarts was given. She doubted that she could charge him with anything in relation to putting the hostages at the bottom of the lake. But stunning them first, maybe, just maybe. At the very least, it was an act of aggression, an attack, assault even, something that her department needed to look into. Briefly, she considered passing it off to one of her auras, but discarded that idea almost immediately. Something that had this much potential to backfire should be handled by the top brass, herself. "Leave it with me, Lord Greengrass," she assured the man across the desk from her. "Give me a day or two, and I'll let you know where the law stands on this." /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. Headmaster's Office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Albus, may I come through? The head of Amelia Bones asked from within the green-tinged embers of the fireplace. Certainly, Albus replied. By the time that Amelia had withdrawn her head, stood, and stepped through the flue system, Albus had arisen from his seat behind his desk. What is it that I can do for you, Amelia? Albus asked. There has been a complaint, she replied. Albus held up a hand, preventing her from continuing. No doubt you had a visit from Cyrus Greengrass, he stated more than questioned. Let me assure you that everything that I have done in the past couple of days has been entirely within my rights as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Amelia frowned at him, her monocle biting into the skin of her face. Using your authority to place students at the bottom of the lake without even informing their parents, let alone asking their permission, is skirting the very edge of the law, Albus. But that is nothing compared to assaulting a minor. Assault? Albus questioned, his hands outstretched as though to ward off the very accusation. I can assure you that I did no such thing. You stunned a student, Albus, Amelia stated, and I'd be willing to bet that Daphne Greengrass wasn't the only one. I explained my actions to Cyrus, Albus sighed. I did what was necessary in order to prevent undue stress on young Miss Greengrass and to ensure that she did not injure herself. You assaulted a minor, Albus, no matter how you want to dress it up, Amelia retorted. And by your very statement, it is clear that you do not dispute the accusation. Amelia had to bite the inside of her cheek at the way. The old man merely blinked his twinkling blue eyes at her. I'm sure that you will find that pursuing this will be a waste of your time, Amelia, Dumbledore finally said. At best, the offense that you seem intent on pursuing will result in a slap on the wrist and a request not to do it again. My defense and my reputation will ensure that. More than likely, any charges that you wish to bring will be dropped long before they reach the courts. As much as she hated to admit it, Amelia knew that he was right. Still, documenting this completely and putting it in his file in case anything like this ever happened again could make this a case of a behavioral pattern. Getting statements from the other 3 hostages would also be useful. As you say, Albus, she finally conceded, but as head of the DMLE, I must inform you that if anything like this ever happens again, I will be pressing charges and pursing this case through not only the courts, but the Wisengamot as well. You do as you see fit, Amelia, Albus replied in a tone that was completely condescending. If you don't mind, I might take the time to drop in on Susan while I'm here, Amelia said, thinking of the first thing that she could that could get her access to the people that she wanted within the castle. Of course, of course. It is always good to take the opportunity to visit with family when it arises, Albus said. And with a nod of farewell, Amelia strode across the room and out the door. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 February 1995. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Amelia was only slightly surprised to be told that her niece was currently in Harry's quarters, and she was even less surprised to find Daphne, Hermione, and Neville in there as well. Susan's letters home over the past few months had highlighted the fact that the 5 of them had become good friends and often spent some time together each week outside of the times set aside for tutoring Harry. You really can't charge him? Daphne asked incredulously. For putting you and Hermione in suspended animation and placing you at the bottom of the lake? No, Amelia replied. He's used the bylaws of Hogwarts to cover himself there. And while I could charge him for assault for stunning you when you were taken to his office, his defense would be enough to give him the benefit of reasonable doubt. The charges simply wouldn't go anywhere. So there's nothing you can do? Hermione asked. For the moment, no, Amelia replied. I have both of your statements, as well as your father's, Daphne. I will also speak to Miss Chang and the Delackers and place them all in the headmaster's file so that they can be used against him if he ever does anything like it again. I don't think my Gran will like what Dumbledore's been doing. even if it is within the bylaws of Hogwarts, Neville said. Maybe you could tell her so that the Board of Governors know. That's a good idea, Neville. I'll do that, Amelia nodded. Seems to me that he wanted to make sure that everyone did what he wanted so that the second task went the way they'd planned, Susan said. Harry snorted at that. If that's the case, I think that I kind of bollocked it up for him. Amelia looked at him curiously. What do you mean? Well, after the second task, Dumbledore pulled me into his office and kept on about how paying the merman like I did wasn't the actions of a champion or a hero, he replied. Amelia sat back in her chair and thoughtfully rubbed her chin. Did he really? Now, that is interesting.